time for Unholy Passion, episode number 2. I'd like to thank everyone who's been listening to the podcast and checked out our first episode that Ralph and I did. And so I got Ralph on the line. So what's going on? How you doing?
I'm doing fine, Mike. How are you?
Hanging in there. It's we're rolling into the spring here, and the weather's getting nicer. It's making me miss going to shows and touring more now that the weather's nice,
So you're going to pack your bags and go to Florida to party down?
Ah, man, no. I might go down to Florida on a horseback with a sword and start cutting people's heads off, maybe. But, there's like a few people in Florida that I would spare, obviously, like Eric Rutan, and like some good friends down there. But I don't know. I'm still playing it safe. You know what I mean? For the most part,
Yeah. Yeah, right here, everybody's getting into the Easter mood. So, this is my first day of Easter holiday. It's always the week before and after the Easter celebration. And right now, the most entertaining thing is that the pandemic is like in this third wave here. Everybody's still in shutdown. They lock down all the tattoo parlors again and shit. But the church is fighting really hard to have like mass gatherings for their church services. And so people started telling them, if it's God's plan to wipe out half the people with this virus, do you think it's a good idea to worship him in this? It's like, no, that's not God's will. But it's like, it's a fact now that like we can't do anything except for the German Bundesliga, which is like the soccer first league comparable to the NFL from size and popularity. So they're still playing, and the churches are still having their services with people in attendance, but everything else is shut down. So total shit show.
That's an interesting philosophical point about worshiping God in the midst of all this, and God's will. And maybe this is this kind of Gnosticism that's going on, you know what I mean, where there's the inversion of God and Satan. Maybe that was true after all,
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe Satan is ruling the earth right now. Maybe we're living in hell. Maybe that's what this is all about.
Yeah, I've been confronted with a kid in school recently that when I spoke about like God and if it's God's will right now to like send out this plague, and then the church staff is complaining that they don't have enough income anymore, which I highly doubt. And I thought like, well, isn't that God's will? And he's like, no, that's God's will is almighty and blah blah blah. And it's like, it's okay. And then he started that. Like the dinosaur bones, like I don't know how we came to this, but he told me that the dinosaur bones are planted by the devil to test our faith and our beliefs, because there was no real all the stuff that happened over millions of years was just like a finger snap of the height of the white man with a white beard, and all of a sudden all we are here and gather Jesus. I don't know, complete horseshit.
Let me ask you a question about religion in Germany. Is there an overwhelming Catholic, like Roman Catholic vibe in Germany? Is that the Christian religion that's primarily in Germany?
It's split. We've got it's like 50-50 Protestants and Catholic Church, but they're like both intertwined. It's a lot of points, but that's the basic Catholic. It's the basic thing we have here that's still dominating, and which is totally absurd for stuff like, I don't know how it's done in the States, but like hospitals here are generally like privatized. And there has been a case, like I just talked about this with a girl in school that told me that she's been, I don't know, approached by someone, and we talked about sexual molestation and shit like this, and that a couple of years ago here in Cologne, a woman was being raped, and she went to a hospital, and they didn't offer her the pill because it was a Catholic like hospital, and then later on it was just like that 5% of the hospital was owned by the Catholic Church, but it was the highest 5%, so they can decide not to help people that got raped because it's God's will that stuff like this happens, you know. If she's pregnant, it's God's will. It's like, wow, okay, great.
Man, that's so fucked up.
Totally.
I've become fascinated with the Catholic religion and actually Christianity in general. Not like I adhere to any of the tenets of those religions, but as a point of study, I find that stuff interesting and how they deal with certain situations. And most interesting to me are those revivalists that I don't know if this exists in Germany, but all through the South, there's these tent revivalists. You know, it's like a it's an archetype that exists in the United States of these maverick preacher men out in the in the population with tents and speaking the word of God and doing all this wild shit. And it's a lot of it verges on madness, you know, but also some of it really harkens back to if you read stories in the Bible about certain characters in that narrative that have gone out into the desert and experienced visions and things like that and come back and, you know, I've changed my life changes, you know, and that whole thing and delivering these speeches and having all these people believe in them and being miracle workers and healers and all that sort of stuff. I find it interesting just because of the power of belief. And I don't know if you've ever read American Gods, like the Neil Gaiman book.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. Where it's like all these gods and entities exist and they exist only on the power derived from the belief that people have in them. And I guess like that's been a big meditation of mine is belief, you know, and that's such a powerful thing. And I guess like you and I, we're both educated men, you know, reasonable people, and we see through a lot of these things from our point of view. Yeah. But from someone who really believes that it's the will of God, that's like the realest thing in their life, man, and that's so fucking intense to me, you know.
Yeah, it's it was part of my studies too when I studied philosophy. And I mean, one subject that like in philosophy when I teach that in ninth grade is the 5 big religions the world has, like the 5 biggest. And so most kids I have in my philosophy classes are Muslim kids because there's no Muslim religious studies in school. And so I talk about the first thing is what is belief, the difference between believing and knowing. And it's so crazy when you talk to kids and like they always think they know that this exists. They know it. And it's like, no, it's believe. And then they get really like some of them get really pissed at me. And
sure,
it's just like, but it's like it's a fact. And it's a fact that you don't have facts, you know, it's a belief. And it's okay if you believe, but it's just like, don't do stupid shit just because of belief and not about like without the backing of knowledge. And that's something that is always fascinating me. And I mean, we talked about this before, are like both interested in these serial killer things. And like, especially when we talk about Manson,
yeah,
they believed in him and they like, he could tell them to do fucked up shit and they would do it because they just believed in him. And that's kind of like, it's gone through all the ages after the First World War. Hitler, he became so powerful because people believed his words that he could change the thing and that they were like lost and he could save them. Yeah. So.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me. Have you ever seen that film, The Apostle, with the one that stars Robert Duvall?
I don't think so. No.
Man, it's such a great movie. It came out. Well, this is a good lead-in, actually, what we're going to be talking about. It came out in the 90s, which was a great decade for music and movies, I thought, you know.
Yeah, it was.
You had to look a little harder for films, I think. But there was a lot of good movies that came out in the 90s. But it speaks to a lot of what we were just discussing about faith and belief and the ultimate feeling of betrayal when you are, Robert Duvall plays one of these like revivalist, Protestant preacher type guys. And there's like a lot of really powerful scenes in there that have to do with belief and the realizations of reality versus knowledge versus belief and all this stuff we were just talking about. I highly recommend that movie.
Cool. Put it on my list to watch. It's like I have 2 weeks off now, so I can finally catch up on shows and films and books, and so I will see if I can find this and track it down and watch it.
What you got any plans to check anything out you've been looking forward to?
I actually try to push back on the DC movies and watch them in holidays, but then all the fuzz about the Snyder Cut of Justice League was happening, and like you, I'm a Marvel guy, and I was never never big on DC comic books except for Batman. And so I really worship these 3 Nolan Batman movies, and like the first older ones, like the really dark ones. But I remember that I watched Man of Steel a while back, and I didn't like it. And then I said, like, okay, I kind of want to know what Justice League is about. So I started like going through all these movies the last weeks. And I have to say, looking back at it now, watching Man of Steel, Batman versus Superman, and now the Snyder Cut of Justice League back to back, it's actually pretty good and entertaining. And but there's like total horse shit, like Suicide Squad or Aquaman. Boy, they made me instantly dumber watching these movies. So I don't know, like I have this, and I wanted to dive into like Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which just like has 2 episodes out. I downloaded the first episodes of Clarice, like So I heard mixed things about this, but then again, I like my plan is to go through the Aliens movies again after remember I suggested watching. Raised by Wolves, and so I watched that the second time, and I really want to go through the Aliens movies again, including the Prometheus one and the Covenant one, just to see like how I feel about them now.
Man, that Raised by Wolves series was fantastic, I have to say.
I was.
There's a podcast that accompanies that too. I don't know if you checked that out too.
Yeah, you told me, and I checked that out. It's great. Yeah.
What I like about it, is their approach is like pretty interesting. So they'll have like someone who's a scientist. They'll have someone who specializes in like Roman mythology, and and they connect because there's so much depth and substance to the to the show. There's a lot going on like underneath the narrative, and I just think it's really cool.
Yeah. So it's a great show from a lot of angles, and I was skeptical at first if they should do a second season. Then the lead in, like what they did to make you curious about the second season, it actually worked. So now I'm on team. Yes, okay, I will watch season 2, and I just hope Ridley Scott is still involved, making all this visual craziness happen. Because that was just so stunning. Just watching it, you could watch it without sound, and it would still be impressive.
Yeah, I've never really been, as far as reading goes, a big fan of hard sci-fi. And recently, I started this book that my friend Chris up in Boston recommended to me called Blind Sight, which it's sort of. I think you might like it if you liked Raised by Wolves, because it's not like that storyline, but it deals with like consciousness and AI and like all these other things, and it's part 1 of a 2-part series, and I'm about halfway through with the book. I'm probably going to finish it this weekend actually, but yeah, it's pretty awesome.
That's cool. It's man. My book pile is so big right now, and I just the last 2 weeks I had to teach every day, so like school was was back open, but it was like a mixed model. So the classes were split in twos, and they just came every other day. But you had to be in school every day, and after you teach a lesson, you have to put the lessons onto like some sort of a message board, so the others could do it at home. And it was just like 14 to 15 hours of work. So in the end, I just like I got a new book the other day. And I started like the first 3 chapters, and it's great. But I just felt like, oh man, I'm so tired and worn out in the evening. So I want to go and finish this one in the holidays now. Do you know Wise Blood by Flannery O'Connor?
Oh yeah, I read that years ago, man. It's a great book.
Yeah, and it's just like I remember I read about it. And then recently I saw a post by PJ Harvey that she was reading this book when she wrote Stories of the City, Stories of the Sea, the record I really, really like. And so I was like, okay, let's see this. Oh man, it just has 150 pages. So I got this and I read the first 3 chapters and I already love it. It's really good.
You know, it's funny. This fits into another upcoming interview, man. The band Bambara, which I'm a huge fan of, and
yeah, man, me too.
Shout out to Retta out in Arizona for turning me on to them, because they would have snuck right by me if she hadn't told me about them. But Reed is going to be a guest in the next week or so. I'm interviewing Reed, and he strikes me as a guy who probably is a student of all this American Gothic writing, like Flannery O'Connor and, Cormac McCarthy and this kind of stuff.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. They are hands down one of the best 10 bands the last years had to offer. It's just like, I remember we talked about this before, but I saw them open up for nothing, and I was there for nothing, and I was like, okay, Bambara, never heard of them. And then they took the stage, and after 2 songs, I'm like, okay, this is the best band I have seen in years. They're so good live. They're such a great band on record. So yeah, if you talk about them, tell them there's a German that they're like a super big fan. I can't wait to get them back over here. And yeah. we were actually supposed to play with them. Ropes of Night. We're supposed to play one of our first shows together with them in Cologne.
That's awesome, man. I can see that. I mean, they definitely span like a lot of different genres, I think. There's like, their earlier stuff was quite different. I don't know if you checked out any of their earlier albums.
Yeah.
They've been a band for like 10 years at least. And,
yeah, really noisy in the beginning.
And now it's like this kind of Nick Cave, Gun Club, Crime in the City Solution, a little bit of the Swans in there, very, very, very American Gothic sounding, and like these lyrics about people living out on the fringes of society and just darkness, stuff like that. It's cool.
Yeah.
Oh, and
I think
sorry.
Yeah,
go ahead,
sorry.
Man. Sorry.
No, it's just like I think I saw like an interview with the singer, and it's Reed. Reed is the singer, right?
Yeah, Reed's the singer. Yep.
Yeah. I think from what I understood, like the lyrics to the last record, they were all part of a novel that he wrote, or like an approach to a novel. And so all the lyrics are connected and part of this bigger story that he wrote, and that's supposedly should be published at some point.
See, I'm like really looking forward to talking to him next week, so that's going to be great. Looking forward to
Cool.
it. Sweet. All right, so today's episode, we're going to engage in this concept that you came up with actually a few years ago, before we committed to doing the monthly show. So I'm kind of excited about this, and it has to do with looking at the same thing from 2 different angles. And you and I, though, we're both older gentlemen. I am quite a bit older than you. I'm about 10 years older than you are. So sometimes there are things that I see differently than you do,
yes,
because of that age gap. So
yeah, which is cool. I mean, it's interesting to like, whenever I listen to the podcast with you and Randy, that's like, okay, so there are like these 2 guys, and I think you're about the same age, right?
Yeah, we're close in age, Randy. Maybe about a couple of years or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm 41 now, so I'm probably like 10 years younger than you guys are.
Yeah, that's about right.
Yeah. So in comparison to my peers, I started like digging into music earlier than the others. So one thing I always like when I talk to people here, it's always people name like these quintessential albums, like from the people that are my age. They say like when we talk about Nirvana, for example, they always say like, "Oh, In Utero, that's the record." I'm like, "No, never mind." It's like, why? It's like, yeah, it was the first one I heard because like I was into music before they were, like at least like on a like the level that I am right now, that we are, that we're like really nerdy about this shit. And like I was watching MTV the whole time. So when Nevermind and Smells Like Teen Spirit happened, I was 11, maybe 12 years old. And this completely got me hooked. And all the other guys, they started later, so they found Nirvana when they were like 14 or something, and In Utero came out. And there are like a bunch of these records. And one discussion I always had was about like which is the quintessential Faith No More album. And when I heard you and Randy talk about, the grunge thing, and I told you like I actually grew up like when Pearl Jam came out, and I appreciate the first three Pearl Jam records. And I thought about like one band that always was named grunge, but wasn't really a grunge band, but happened in the same time was Faith No More. And they got immensely big here. And with Angel Dust, they did one of my all-time favorite records, and that's what when I bounced the ideas like, should we talk about Faith No More? And I was like, okay, let's see what Mike thinks about them. And I kind of had the feeling you wouldn't like them, but then I thought like maybe he also liked them, but you don't, from what I understood.
It's not a yes or no type of answer, honestly, because
Yeah.
I own two Faith No More records.
Which would be?
I own The Real Thing and Introduce Yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I stopped there because when Angel Dust came out, I was moving away from that sound, I think, a little bit, because in the 80s, all right, let's break it down this way. Like, okay, giving some context, when you were like getting into Nirvana, so for me, my entry point into like alternative music, for lack of a better term, or punk rock or whatever, was like the Ramones and Black Flag and like Circle Jerks and stuff like that. So that when I was the same age, like there was that era of music is what brought me in. And then by the time Nirvana came out, I was already I already had like a little bit more of a perspective on things, I think. And but that's not, once again, going back to what we were talking about religion. It's like if you that's your reality, man, and that's cool. Like that's there's different infinite realities we all live in, and that's like for you that stuff is as significant as the early like Ramones kind of stuff was to me. So I get it, I understand that. And they're an interesting band. Like I'm not trying to say that Faith No More are not important and they're not influential and have done something very crucial in the pastiche of the music world. But for me personally, 1987 was like around the time I think I started discovering these bands. So, was it Introduce Yourself came out in 87. I remember seeing the video for We Care a Lot at that point. But then the Uplift Mofo Party Plan by the Red Hot Chili Peppers came out that same year. So for me, all right, 1985, 86, 87, 88, it was like white guys with dreads and partially shaved heads, and dudes wearing like t-shirts with ties and stuff like that, and shorts with combat boots and all that.
Socks on dicks.
Yeah, socks, shirtless, like Cali dudes, like that was kind of like, I saw that. I looked at these bands and there was like, that was like the Jane's Addiction, another band like that, Fishbone,
Yeah.
Like I always looked at Faith No More as like fitting more, at least initially, as fitting more into that kind of vibe. as like what I think they turned into. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And for me, the Peppers, and I'm an unapologetic Red Hot Chili Peppers fan, and like I understand there's a lot of things to not like about them. I know that my good friend Eugene Robinson fucking hates the Red Hot Chili Peppers for personal reasons, and I've never met any of those guys. I've never had any interactions with them. I just think their music was especially in the early days pretty different, you know. And so to me, Faith No More was like kind of like a paler version of that band because of the funk elements and the rapping and all that kind of stuff. And that's not to say I didn't like those albums though, because I did like the Chuck Mosley record.
Yeah. The thing is, like, I think if I would be older, I also wouldn't have liked them. I'm pretty sure if I would have lived earlier and had like different experiences, I would also would have approached them differently. When I was that age back then, I didn't really care for like how they looked or anything. It's just like the music was cool, but like I saw like I also the Blood Sugar Sex Magic came out the same time. And I remember, like in this youth magazine, like a teen magazine that I still had, like it's a subscription. My parents paid that for me, and there was like a lot of like New Kids on the Block and all this shit was happening. Also, oddly enough, at the same time, Depeche Mode's Violator happened.
Oh yeah,
and was in there, and they had like a special on underground music and how people dress. So there was like a metal guy, a chubby guy with long, filthy hair in a leather jacket with a lot of patches on. And there were like 3 records we suggest you to listen to. And it was like a Napalm Death record, a Carcass, and an Obituary record. And then there was like, I don't know what the other thing was, but I think that the third one was a grunge guy. And I had like this proto look of a grunge guy, you know, like ripped off short jeans with like leggings underneath it, a flannel shirt, and like curly hair, long curly hair. And it had like a suggestion was like Nevermind by Nirvana, 10 by Pearl Jam, and Angel Dust by Faith No More.
oh,
And to this day, I don't think that Faith No More is in the slightest a grunge band.
no,
And they were all the time were like in between chairs. But I can totally see what you're saying. Like in general, all these like I've tried to find out as much as I could about these bands back then, and there was no internet, so you had to have magazines and like had to buy CDs, like just from hearing about a name or seeing someone wearing a band shirt, or it was on 120 Minutes or shit like this. And I never got into Fishbone. I never got into Living Color. Never got into Jane's Addiction. And I also like I like the Chili Peppers, but that Faith No More stuff, and I don't know why, but that just like did more for me. And I picked up the Life at Brixton Academy tape when I was on a field trip in France with my class back then. And it was also the first time I heard of Black Sabbath because they were covering War Pigs.
yeah,
And so like they opened again, like back then I remember buying death metal CDs, and then you read like the thanks list and you watch like check out the shirts, and then you buy the next CD based upon the shirts that these guys were wearing. And so I found out about Black Sabbath and all these bands. And that's the thing, like I think when you listen to especially The Real Thing, when Jim Martin was in the band and was like he can shred, man. He's like a killer guitar player. And that's like at some parts it's a real classic metal record. They just have different elements in it. It's just like, I don't know, more emotionally, and sometimes it's kind of like weirdly funny or bizarrely humorous in what they're doing. I can understand why metal people didn't like it, but something clicked with me. And then when Angel Dust came out and Patton sang in a lower key, that was the difference that it made for me. I'm not a fan of I like like Chuck Mosley's vocals better than I like the vocals on The Real Thing, but I like best the vocals on Angel Dust and everything he did after that.
yeah. Well, Mike Patton, is like, you know, just levels above what Chuck Mosley can do vocally, you know.
Yeah.
And I mean, I remember speaking about T-shirts. I remember seeing Metallica wearing like a Faith No More. One of the guys in Metallica, maybe Jason Newsted or something like that, was wearing a Faith No More T-shirt,
Yeah.
and I was like that. I mean, that was like the same thing. Like I would see bands I liked wearing T-shirts of other bands, and I would check them out. And then back in the '80s, and into the '90s, MTV was playing music videos, and the visual aspect became like very prominent as to like how I would relate to music. And what's his name? Martin, the guitar player.
Jim Martin, yes,
Jim Martin,
right.
yeah. Like when I saw the Real Thing video, because there was a little bit of time between We Care a Lot and the Real Thing, and
Yes.
and I actually bought the Real Thing first, and then bought the Introduce Yourself record after that. After seeing both, recognizing that as being the same band with two different singers, and Martin, the guitar, Jim Martin's guitar playing, the kind of heavy metal thrash vibe to it. I was like, oh, I can relate to this. And I did. I mean, I used to listen to this record. It wasn't like I like, pshaw, like I like the Chili. No, it wasn't like that at all. Excuse me. I really did. I would run this album a lot back in the day. And, I was into it. I thought it was cool. Like I didn't, I thought it was like a new direction that like, metal being fused with like rap and I liked rap, man. I mean, that was also, growing up in, the suburban New York City world, hip hop in high school, like Run DMC, like all that stuff we were all listening to that kind of music. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely listened to this record, but I think that I didn't make the transition into the '90s with them. That's all I'm trying to say, I guess.
Yeah, and I can totally see why, and that's what I meant. We're like very very much alike when it comes to like a lot of musical stuff, and I think if, as I said, like if I would have been like born younger, I think the same would have happened. But I was born into like this phase when Angel Dust came out, and they were just like a more serious band, because I think even though like even on Angel Dust they have kind of like weird lyrics and like a mixed songs, it's a very dark record and it's more sinister. And also the music videos, if you watch like the Real Thing video, it's kind of corny when you look back at it. But in 91, 92, like all these videos, and I think Them Bones by Alice in Chains and Wood, like two of my favorite videos from that time, because they were just so fucking cool. Like that band playing the songs was just so good. Excuse me. And the Midlife Crisis video was one of the first things I saw, and I was like, oh, that's awesome. And they had like kind of the same coolness to it, even though they sounded different. But that was the prime of music videos that started around that time. And I was a total MTV kid. I said this before on this podcast and also on Metal Matters. I videotaped Headbangers Ball, 120 minutes, Yo MTV Raps, and I did like mixtapes with two VCRs hooked to each other. And I kept on watching them, and I think still to this day, my haircut is defined by Lane Staley's haircut in the Wood video and Mike Patton's hairstyle in the Midlife Crisis videos. I don't know. It's just like they were so fucking cool, and I still to this day think they were a fucking cool band. And I have to say, like whenever people come up to me, it's like, so why did you include keyboards in Ulfa after the first record? It's like, it's Fields of the Nephilim, New Model Army, and Faith No More. All these bands I loved, and they all had keyboards, and they used it in such an interesting way. And given the fact that Roddy Bottum, like the keyboard player in Faith No More, is the main songwriter, is also interesting. And it's just like they use it to such an extent that it makes this whole thing so grandiose. And I think they did it perfectly on Angel Dust.
Yeah, I listened to the record a few times, in preparation for this, and yeah, I mean, it is a cool album. Like I probably will now that it's, significantly later in my life, appreciate this record more, because I just remember at the time I was like, this is all right, and just not really like, because I was just into different stuff, you know what I mean? And now I think there's a lot of things that I look back on and I have more appreciation for that I did when I first heard them. Maybe, I mean, it's just getting older, I guess. You hear things differently. You had more life experience, like all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's also like, I think that phase, and for me, that was stuff that happened initially in this moment. But for people like you that have been into music longer, this time in the 90s, there was a significant change in how people approached their music. And it's also like the big, like what happened at the same time. I mean, grunge was the biggest thing that happened. And I think it made a lot of bands that had been active for a bunch of years, rethink their approach. And if you listen, for example, I know you as much as I am, we're both not big fans of Anthrax. Like, they're okay, respect them, but I was never an Anthrax guy. But then in 92, I think The Sound of White Noise came out, where they had John Bush of Armored Saint singing. Yeah. And they had like a more grunge sound. And to this day, I can still listen to that record and think it's a cool record. The same happened with Creator, like the, for me, best Teutonic thrash band there is. And I mean, we all know like what Creator like started. But then in 92, Renewal came out, and it was like a totally different sound. It was slower and it was heavier, from like chunkier from the riffs. Miller started singing differently, and it's just interesting that such a shift happened because of like a bunch of guys in Seattle or in the Washington area doing something differently. And I don't know, like this time of my life was so impactful, and that's why I like treasure all these records from that time. And I can see why people say, okay, I like the earlier stuff better, or when people say, oh, King for a Day, Fool for a Lifetime is the better record because they entered it later. It's just not my thing. I think the cool thing about Angel Dust is it's so mixed. It's totally, like, it's an odd mixture of styles they had, but they did it in a way that it's still like one big entity. I think if you listen to King for a Day, Fool for a Lifetime, it has some great songs, but overall it's like from every song to the next song they skip the style, and it's such a big difference that it's not cool for me. I don't like it. So yeah, so they kind of lost me after that. They got me back later with Album of the Year. But yeah, for me, that time with Real Thing and Angel Dust was like the best phase they had.
Do you know that Kiss even had a grunge album? I don't know if you knew that.
Oh no!
Yeah,
which one is that?
It's a record called Carnival of Souls.
I know the artwork, but I don't know the records.
Yeah, it's
really?
Carnival of Souls. It's like it came out in the 90s, and it was like it was like down tuned, like slow, like kind of like the blueprint of like the bass intro, that kind of thing. That sort of tempo, you know what I mean? Like 100, like maybe 120 BPM or something like that, with like, drums, like heavy toms, like stuff, like this kind of like whimsical, like vocals and everything.
Oh man. Okay. I have to check that out. It sounds weird thinking about Kiss doing this, but then again, we all know what Celtic Frost was up to later on.
Yeah, totally. I mean, well, the thing is too, it's like, it's interesting what you mentioned though, just about how things really did, like bands that didn't have any business playing grunge, like that have had full careers doing something else, pivoted into this whole other style as a result of that. Either. Obviously, with Kiss, it was probably just to make money and, stay relevant and that kind of thing. But some bands just, I think maybe in the case of Anthrax, like even though I don't really like that album, it might just be in the spirit of, well, let's try something new. Like, we dig this other stuff. Like we like the way these bands sound. Let's try it in the context of the band we play in and see where it goes.
It's so all over the place with heavy, like, let's call it guitar music for a lack of a better term. But if you take Carcass, where Carcass started,
Oh
And
yeah.
then like Necroticism, still my favorite record of them. But then the transition to Hard Work, and like from Hard Work, which was like this critically acclaimed, very easily accessible record, to Swan Song, which was like mid-tempo rock and roll record almost. Like people, like I think at some point bands just think like, I'm tired of doing the same stuff all over again. And the weird thing is that mostly it fails, and then they return to what they started early on, and then it gets cringeworthy. For example, Paradise Lost is such an example for me. Like I love the way you started. I'm with them until Icon. Then they started becoming like with Draconian Times, like an I don't know kind of an indie band, and they like it had two straight up indie records that could have been played next to I don't know whatever indie band was popular at that time, to totally fail with their original fans, and later on it's like, oh yeah, we'll go back to death metal now, and now the guy can't sing anymore.
Yeah, their earlier stuff really got me. You know what I mean? I mean, yeah. I mean, they at this stage of the game, Paradise Lost has more like terrible records than good ones, in my opinion. You know?
Yeah, another example, just because there was the to me my favorite thrash record of all times, and please don't throw stones at me, but it's not a Slayer record. It's Arise by Sepultura,
Oh, that's a
and
great
then
album, man. I love that record.
it had a 30-year anniversary, and look what happened between Arise in 1990 and Chaos AD in 90, I think 3 or 94. The same time, like Machine Head came out, and like a lot of bands back then changed their style. Also, Justice for All to the Black Album, it's already a big shift. And it's kind of, I don't know, like if music television made these bands try to be more accessible in a way. I don't know, man.
I think that with Sepultura though, that Chaos Eddie record still is an iconic album, definitely.
It is, yeah, most def.
And I even, I'm going to say that I even like parts of Roots, to be honest.
Oh, I fucking hate that.
See, I know, man. There you go. It's like I think that record I would say 70% of that album is pretty good. But then again, I also like Diabolica in Musica, the Slayer, the new metal Slayer record that came out too.
Yeah. But do you know who did guest vocals on Roots?
I don't know. I'm gonna guess. I could guess, but I'd rather you tell me.
It's Mike Patton. Like he sang that Rata Mahata kind of tribal drumming song.
Yeah,
it's Mike Patton singing. So that's what I said earlier. I think that Faith No More like led the way to this crossover thing that happened, and then new metal and crossover, like not the crossover that Randy and you talked about, but the terrible crossover, which was super immensely popular here. So metal with rap vocals. I kind of blame Body Count to an extent to this, but I don't fuck with Ice-T. Like I love Ice-T, and I don't fuck with Body Count on a negative way. But like all this shit that happened back then, like Judgment Night soundtrack happened, and all of a sudden all the metal bands had like rap vocals, and in Germany that got so big, and it was terrible.
I blame Helmet for all of that, man. I mean, which is so ironic because, Helmet in the beginning was like this kind of like artsy, Glenn Branca, like noise kind of band. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
With like my impression of Helmet in the beginning is you get a guy like Page Hamilton who's like this virtuoso guitarist, like very into like this highbrow, like musical expression. And they're almost like Glenn Branca meets, Big Black, like with an actual drummer instead of a drum machine, and just like percussive, very machine-like, repetitious thing going on. But that also lends itself. I mean, if you think about like rap and hip hop music, and you think about, for example, Public Enemy. Was it Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back came out in like 88 or something, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And that has rap music with like a slightly faster tempo. I don't know, that record is more like has industrial beats on it almost.
Yeah. And then again, like Public Enemy and Anthrax, Bring the Noise. One of the first, like maybe the second after after Aerosmith and Run DMC. Maybe the second of this real like this rap metal crossover things that happened. And I remember, like, I got the picture 10-inch of Bring the Noise from a friend back then, and I really liked it. It's probably one of the better songs of Anthrax that I really like. Yeah. But this rap metal thing, I don't know, man. Like Judgment Night, Helmet had a song with House of Pain on Judgment Night, and then the same, like, do you know the Judgment Night soundtrack?
Yeah, everyone. Yeah. I actually kind of like that record, to be honest.
Yeah, and there's the best song on there is Faith No More with Booyah Tribe. That was super dark. And later on, like a bit later in the 90s, you had the Spawn soundtrack, where then again you had metal mixed with techno and industrial. We had like this phase with everything that Nine Inch Nails started, with all the Stabbing Westward and all these bands, which had Marilyn Manson and the Sneaker Pimps go together and stuff like this. And everybody hates the Spawn movie, and boy, that needs to be remade, like in a proper way. Like Spawn needs a real proper movie. But the soundtrack is so iconic. Everybody knows the soundtrack. And also, I don't know anybody that says like, oh yeah, man, Judgment Night, that was a great movie. But everybody knows that fucking soundtrack.
That's a good point. I actually kind of believed in rap metal back in the day, because I thought the people that were doing it, you got Anthrax, Public Enemy, you got the House of Pain with like Helmet, that it actually potentially could have been a cool thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like if the right people did it, but it also, I hate to be like a hipster about it, but it's like, but I feel like it touched a nerve with the wrong people and it turned into this really abysmal style of music.
Oh God, man, that was like in the 90s. That was like Central Media did a lot of this shit in Europe at that time. Like I remember there was one band, just like I will tell you the name and how the cover artwork look, and you tell me if there's a chance you will ever listen to them. So the band is called Black Eyed Blonde, and it has like a light blue cover with a yellow dildo on front of it. That was like one of the most successful German crossover bands.
I don't think that would entice me to listen to the record, actually.
No. Terrible time, man. But yeah, man, Faith No More, we're kind of like pushing this, and I also think like when I did research for this episode, you remember, like you said earlier that like you saw like one of Metallica wearing a Faith No More shirt. Metallica were actually big fans of Faith No More. So were like Slash and Duff McKagan.
Yeah.
And they brought them on tour together, and they had there was a tour of Guns N' Roses, Faith No More, Metallica, and Soundgarden, which is like a badass lineup thinking about it. And also Robert Plant is a big fan of Faith No More. But then like this that's cool, but like later on, like the more people that quoted are the guys from Slipknot, System of a Down, Korn. They all say like without Faith No More, there would have been no Slipknot. And I think, well, maybe then there shouldn't have been a Faith No More in the end. Yeah, but it's weird. But they pushed a lot of boundaries back then, and I just have tremendous respect. Like looking back at the development and now being able to like find old interviews and like read articles about how much they didn't give a fuck about what people thought. They were like, we're metal fans, but we grew up. I mean, Roddy Bottom, if you listen to the We Care a Lot EP, the first thing they recorded in 1985, it sounds almost like the first Ministry record. And like with a lot of dark wave in it. And Roddy Bottom said, like, in the beginning, we wanted to sound like Susie and the Banshees, Theater of Hate. And the Cramps were a big influence. And I can totally hear it in the first record. Then with Introduce Yourself, they got more into this percussive, like slap bass thing. And with the Real Thing, they were like a straight up metal band without being a straight up metal band. But I can see like why metal people hated them, and some said like this is the best thing ever.
Well, slap bass was kind of big in the 80s too. It's like that, There was like a bunch of stuff going on in the late '80s with slap bass in
Yeah.
quote unquote metal music. And there's 24/7 Spies. There which was like this kind of
Oh
bad
yeah.
bad brains like influenced band out of New York, and they had some slap
Yeah.
bass. There was, of course, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, where their whole like rhythm section revolved around slapping the bass.
Yeah, and then there's Ryan Patterson and slapping bass on a photo crime record.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the last on the South of Heaven, the record he put out last year. He told me for it, Ralph. There's the song I slapped the bass on there. Don't hate me.
Wow.
It's just there's the slap bass on, but it's actually he pulled it off. I mean, it's he's a child of the '80s as much as you and I are, even though I'm younger. But like, I mean, I love photo crime. I love Ryan, and he pulled it off. And I mean, we all know that you can pull off slap bass without being totally corny and idiot.
Now we were talking about corn and these bands. So
Yeah.
there is a difference, I think, between new metal and rap metal.
Yes, definitely.
There's a subtle difference. And we, if we're gonna like talk about all the influence and the great things about Faith No More, we also have to talk about new metal too. And Helmet is also, they're the fucking culprits behind that scene.
Yeah, I always blame Roots by Sepultura when we were talking about this, because then I don't even know if Roots came out after the first Korn record. But it was also like it was down-tuned, it was more rhythmical, more mid-tempo. I think the first time that I ever heard a band in that vein was when the first Machine Head came out, a record I totally loved back then. Recently tried it. To me, it doesn't stand the test of time. But I remember Rob Flynn on Headbangers Ball introduced Korn as the next big thing coming in metal. And boy, was he right, because like, that first Korn record, it made everything happen. And yeah, I don't know. What's your take on new metal?
I'm not into it, man. It's like I think that was one of the biggest failures in creativity of modern man, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But hey, people, what's crazy is Bobby Torres, the guy who recorded our last couple of albums. He's actually, it's interesting. He actually doesn't record as much these days. Like he's really focused on his YouTube instructional series on audio engineering. And so he's really, nowadays, he's choosing what projects that he works on, and he has his other guys do the bulk of the work that comes into the studio. So for years and years and years, he was recording all these bands out here in New Jersey. And the last time we were in his studio recording Under Sullen Skies, he was telling us a story about, he's like, yeah, there's like all these new bands now that they consider themselves to be new metal. Like they're like, yeah, we're a new metal band. Like it's like a style, like black metal or well, I mean, it is a style, but
yeah,
I guess there's a resurgence, at least here in the tri-state area, of new metal music.
Oh man, yeah, it's our next door rehearsal space neighbors. For like, where I have a rehearsal space with where Ultha and also Ropes at Night rehearses, and the band next door is called the Cologne New Metal All Stars, and they're like doing a bunch of cover songs, and they also have their original material, but they fucking sound like Static X, System of a Down, and all these terrible bands that came out. And I remember, like, when the first Korn came out, I spoke about this on our like the point of entry episode. It's like the sound aesthetic of a deeper sound with more bass was always more intriguing to me. I think I blame it on that I first heard Justice for All before I heard every other Metallica record. And that's also why Ultha doesn't sound like a tape deck recording, and why I dig bands that have like this heavy, chunky sound. And then like the first Korn came out, and it was just like, it was so deep. I mean, there were 7 strings down tuned, and back then I have never heard anything like this, because I mean, there was doom, and I'm pretty positive there were like a lot of funeral doom bands that were out there that I didn't know by that time. But I also didn't know Godflesh, and so that was impressive to me. And then, like, I bought the first Korn record, and then the Deftones came out, and to this day, I hold the Deftones as a very good band, but they had different influences, and they're the only band out of all these bands that were kind of serious. Not like, I mean, there were so many horrible bands with spiky hair and stupid names and stupid gimmicks, and the Deftones were always like, no, dude, we grew up with Duran Duran and Echo and the Bunnymen, and we just like the sound. And I mean, they also had like, we call it sausage hair, so like dreadlocks.
Yeah, I'm aware. I'm familiar with that.
So I don't know, like the Deftones, the first Deftones record came out on Madonna's label, and they were not as much downtuned as they were later on. But I fucking liked that, and I still to this day I treasure the Deftones as the only band out of that whole new metal thing that is really like halfway important.
I agree about the Deftones. I did not like them when they were like when they were like new, like in the 90s. I remember that White Pony record came out, and
Yep.
I was living in Boston at the time, and you know, I was doing Anodyne, and I was living with these dudes. You know, we were in this house, and the guys were like, you know, more like in the hardcore world. You know, they were like when guys who play in hardcore bands, like real deal hardcore bands, you know, like they're into that specific thing. When they get to be like 27, 28 years old, they want to like do something differently. You know what I mean? So Radiohead and the Deftones were like the thing that those guys started getting into. You know what I mean? At least, and we're talking about the 1996 through 1999 era of time.
Yep.
So I just remember these guys were like listening to this shit all the time, and I was like, you know, this is like, I don't know, man, this is soft. Like, you guys are fucking like, I don't know, like this is like for girls or something like that, you know? I mean, and like I should have been thinking like, yeah, this is cool. Maybe I could hang out with girls who like this kind of stuff too. But I wasn't. I was much more into like my remote isolationist world that I was living in that period of time. But now, as time goes on, like maybe 7 years ago, I started seeing the value in the Deftones and even Radiohead, you know, and I think both of those bands are actually really good.
Yes, totally agree. Like it's the same case with New Model Army. When you talk about New Model Army, a lot of people say love the music, hate the fans. And that's the way I felt on the Deftones shows I saw, as well as the Radiohead shows I saw. I'm not a fan of the like original two records of Radiohead. I like them more when they started becoming more experimental and also a bit darker. And with the Deftones, again, that's the same topic as I mentioned earlier. Everybody's always, do you like the Deftones? Yeah. Oh man, White Pony. It's like, no, dude. The Adrenaline record, the first one, and Around the Fur, the second one. It's like, oh no, dude. It's like, again, I was earlier into them. Probably if I would have started listening to music later, I also would have said White Pony. But I totally like love those records, and they're a good band. And again, I think the difference is the influences they had. And as Chino Moreno is a great vocalist, and he did a lot of cool stuff with different projects with interesting people. I mean, he was in Palms with your buddy, and doing all this
with my buddy. Yeah. Jeff, Aaron, and Cliff were all in that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then to bridge the gap back, ISIS was on Ipecac, right?
Yep. Well, towards the end, like they're you know, when they were like gigantic, they were on Ipecac, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's like, I mean, it's all. So I assume like Jeff must have met Mike Patton at some point, or Yeah, and I also that's the one thing I always wonder about. I think Mike Patton is an artist, and I think he must be like, if you talk to him, I assume he's nice, but he could be very difficult in his way, kind of like a Michael Girard kind of person.
Sure.
I don't know, like to like if you look at the output that Mike Patton has, he's driven and he's relentless, man. Like he has so much stuff going on, and I think you must be kind of crazy to do all the stuff that he did. And it's crazy to see him in these with his long hair and the like turnaround mash hat, like he wasn't over the top, but he was playing in like in the real thing videos, and seeing him nowadays like doing impro vocal stuff with John Thorne, doing vocals, like being the first one to ever sing on a Boron and the Club of Gore song. And it's incredible what this guy has done throughout his career, and I totally respect him for that.
Yeah, will never ever like denigrate anything about his work ethic or his technical vocal abilities, man, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he's incredible when it comes to that. But no, it's just the record label, like all that, stuff's really really cool. I mean, I am not really like typically I don't. That's not like a record label that I'm like, like scrutinizing and following or anything like that. I mean, I have a few records. I mean, Dialect came out on that record label, of course. The Locusts put out a record. ISIS. Yeah. ISIS being on Ipecac was the how I found out about the label.
Mm-hmm.
And no, it's just funny. I remember back the relationship, I think, with Mike Patton started in the late 90s with Hydra Head, because I remember one day when I was still living in Boston, I was walking home from the subway, or they call it the T up there in Boston, and I ran into Mark from who was working with Aaron on Hydra Head. Mm-hmm. And this is maybe 1998, something around there, somewhere in that time, 97. Mm-hmm. And Mark's like, "Oh yeah, man, we're down with Mike Patton." And I was like, "So? Like, why is that important?" But it was important, because they started doing stuff on a label end together. And then when ISIS, I mean, there's, I'm sure everyone out there probably imagines the type of opportunities ISIS might have had, when they started becoming really, really, really big. They were big, like they were big in like a hardcore way. Back in the 97, 98, like being able to pack like a 400 capacity room, like big in the way that Converge was big, back then.
Oh.
And, but then what they started for some, I mean, I think that I find it, I think their music is done well, but I also was like, man, I can't believe that regular people like them. Like people who, because there's no real, like, the songs are long. There isn't any kind of like vocal thing going on that might, attract people, like in like kind of like a popular sort of way, populist kind of way. But they started becoming like a real commercially viable band, and as you can imagine, they had other opportunities, but they decided to go with Ipecac. And I think a lot of that probably had to do with, with their relationship with Patton, and probably Patton being an artist himself, like his maybe his take on what the contract might have looked like, that kind of stuff. So I give him credit for that too,
Yeah, and I think he's like throughout everything he has done, and I was just like a bit blown away when I did research for this episode, like on how much stuff he has put out and with how many amazing people he has worked with. I think he's just an overall fan of music still to this day, like a nerd like you and I am, but just like we never broke to that point that we can live off that shit and commit full time. So we always have to work like a regular grind and do the bands besides that. And I mean, both like Ultha and Tombs even more. We're doing a lot of stuff for having regular jobs next to it. But he's doing it full time, and I have tremendous respect for it. And he's done so much cool stuff. And it's making me cringe just to think about that. He sang on the Bourne and the Club of Gore record. He sang on the Dillinger Escape Plan EP, did something with Merzbow, and now he's singing the new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle song for the new video game that just came out. It's It's totally weird, but it fits. Like it fits my picture of him. Have you ever like speaking? Have you ever listened to that Phantom Moss record where they did the movie scores?
You know, I listened to the first Phantom Us record and I didn't get into it at all. And
No,
I never checked out the score one. Maybe I'll like
yeah,
that one. I don't know.
yeah. I same here. I'm not a fan of Tomahawk. I'm not a fan of Phantom Moss, but that score record they did, that's actually pretty cool. And there's like live videos of that with King Buzzo and Def Lombardo, and that's actually pretty cool. Yeah. But that band Dead Cross might be up your alley if you don't know them.
Yeah. I remember actually Justin was on Everything Went Black a number of years ago when
Yeah.
and he mentioned Dead Cross, and it's all right. You know, I don't know, like that. I like it just because Justin's involved in it, and I like
Yeah.
most of the stuff. Like Retox, I think is cool. Like, but
Yes.
I get tired of that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
I feel like I heard it all before. It's kind of like rehashing. It's like that fast, like San Diego kind of stuff. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
it's all kind
Totally.
of been well documented, and the Dead Cross stuff is a little bit different. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's also that's more like a live band, or when you're on the road and you need something. Okay, I have a 20-minute drive and I'm kind of tired. That's when I put that on. But it's nothing I own on vinyl. But like seeing that live with all the staff members, it's crazy and it's pretty cool. But yeah, also like not a band that I would actually buy. Retox, I saw 2 times. That was I think more my style. But yeah, the San Diego stuff didn't age well in my like for me. A lot of people still treasure it, but the whole thing about this screamo chaos core thing, not a lot of bands still hold up to this day for me.
Nah, you know, and those guys are like probably like a little too cool to like for the likes of me. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's like,
I see. Yeah.
but
That's funny. It's funny that the San Diego style like influenced the whole Swedish scene. That refused could become refused the way they are is pretty much because the swing kids were the swing kids.
yeah, definitely. You know, I mean that a lot of those like the Crimson Curse and the Locust and Swing Kids, like those bands I think are definitely, I can still listen to that stuff. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's like back then I was all over that, and I can still listen to it. But that's what I mean. Like, not a lot of bands actually hold up, and some of them you listen to them and think like, I remember why I loved this so much. But today it's just like it's okay, but it's not not a music that I put on like not a lot of times anymore.
Yeah, definitely not. But yeah, I think we hit it, man. You know, we got
Yeah.
our episode in about this Faith No More difference of opinion or slightly different angles on this
Yeah.
topic.
Which wasn't such a different opinion after all.
No, it's just
it's
that there's different overtones to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious to see if we ever find a topic where we really like complete opposites, like, like talking about this and like, no, this is good. No, it's not.
I don't think that would. I mean, you and I have such similar takes on things that I don't think that's ever really going to happen. But I just think that it's fun to see things through different perspectives sometimes. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why I want to do this either or thing at some point, where we'd like really like put 2 choices. So what's your choice and why? And I think that could be cool.
All right, man. Well, thanks everyone for listening, and we'll catch you guys next month. Actually, talk to you later.